There are times where, an individual can make a huge difference. And, sometimes millions or billions of people will just be seeing something happen and saying, there's nothing we do about that. And then one person steps up and says, no, we can do something about it. And almost just by that action, by that stance alone, others say, okay, maybe you're right, we can.
Welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where I talk with inspiring leaders across the country who are making the world a better, more sustainable place. I'm your host, Connor Gahn, and today I'm joined by Tim Sheehy, a former U.S. Navy SEAL turned businessman and entrepreneur. After his highly decorated military career, which included 2 medals for valor in combat, a Purple Heart, and a Bronze Star for valor, Tim founded Bridger Aerospace in 2014, an aviation service provider working to prevent wildfires, and Ascent Vision Technologies in 2015, which provides cutting-edge technology to customers including the U.S. government. Tim is a shining example of taking action. Bridger Aerospace's mission is to save lives, protect property, and protect habitat. And they live up to those values through their wildfire fighting services and the way they operate their business, as does Tim and his personal passions. If you're needing any inspiration for the future, look no further. Tim, I'm so honored to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. So why don't we just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Sure. I'm from Minnesota originally. I live in Montana now with my wife and 4 kids, and that's where our company is.
You started out at the Naval Academy. Give us a little bit about that experience. How'd you end up there?
Sure. So I grew up, as I said, on a lake in Minnesota, and my neighbor growing up was a Navy pilot from the Korean War, and he used to land his plane on the lake. Sometimes in the winter when it was frozen, summer on floats, and I always liked airplanes, but he took me up flying once, and I just fell in love with it immediately as an 8-year-old kid, and knew right away that aviation was going to be a part of my life, and I already had an interest in the military, so. Partly due to his inspiration, my parents were extremely supportive as well. I decided I wanted to go into the Navy and be a Navy pilot. And, where better to start that career than the Naval Academy? So, that's really what led me there. I'm 37 now, so I was in high school when 9/11 happened. So when 9/11 occurred, that only drove home to me more the need to serve our nation and perform public service in a time of national need. So that just reinforced my decision to enter the military and go to the Naval Academy.
But I'm curious, just, in terms of your time in the military, what stands out as the most personally important or impactful aspect of your service?
Well, to be honest, it's really hard to take all that and boil it down into one point, but it truly comes down to knowing that what I'm doing is benefiting others in a very real way. And I think a lot of people feel that and live that, and we all have our own calling to service, and we all find out what our own mission is. And sometimes it takes us our whole life to figure that out. Some people never figure that out. But I think for me, in a corny, maybe hero complex sort of way, for me, the ultimate form of mission and service is putting your own self on the line to help others, and especially helping others who are not in a position to help themselves. And that's guided me, really my whole life, from military service and then, of course, into the companies I founded outside of military service, always trying to serve a higher mission and serve the greater good and protect people and help people that, through whatever circumstances, aren't in a position to help themselves.
So you attend the Naval Academy thinking you go into pilot training, but tell us a little bit more about your time in the service and then the ultimate transition into the business world.
Yeah, so, obviously I didn't end up being a Navy pilot. I ended up becoming a Navy SEAL officer. And, that was another, as I've learned in life, is, we all have our trajectory we think our life will follow. And, maybe some people are really good about following that little treasure map. But at least for me and most people I know, if you rewinded 30 years and asked your child self if you would be doing what you're doing now, almost certainly that child would say no. And I'm no different than that. I never planned to start a business. I never planned to get out of the military. I never planned to become a SEAL in the first place. But I had a series of events that led me out of the military. I was wounded in combat. Medically, I was placed on a operational hold as a SEAL, and it had been a really busy few years. I was not in the military long. All in, I was in uniform, active duty for about 10 and a half years. But some people do 30 years, 40 years. But I had a lot of combat time in that period. It was a busy time. We had 2 wars going on, and my wife as well was a combat veteran. So, after I was injured for the last time, and my wife and I had to really make the decision, were we going to stay in or were we going to move on? And for me, the passion of the military was leading my men in combat, leading my men on missions and being a team leader. And when I could no longer do that, the passion to stay in the military was kind of gone. So, and looking for what was next in life for us, at the time, this was 2014, it was a decision for me. I said, really the best way I can serve my country, I think, is starting a business, creating jobs and providing really important capabilities to those still in service in some way. And I can do that from the outside. And that's what led me to start my own company. I never thought we'd get to the size that we have, but, in my own small part, provide important capabilities through technology and services to those still serving.
So it's a good segue to giving us the origin story of Bridger Aerospace. How did that start?
Well, it started literally in a barn in Montana, and all the savings my wife and I had from the military, and so when we were deployed, there wasn't really any expenses. So we accrued, a good amount of savings, a few $100,000 that we'd saved up over many deployments. And when you're deployed, you do get combat pay. You get an extra, depending on what you're in, $200 a month, and that adds up over time. So we had some savings, and my brother wasn't in the military. He was in business in the private sector. He was a great mentor of mine, as was my father, and they helped me to kind of figure out how I would set up this entity and how I could potentially grow it. So we started Bridger. We bought one plane from NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And really that was all our cash. We bought the plane. My high school, middle school friend of mine, my best friend, Sam Beck, moved out to Montana, and he invested a bit too. And he didn't make any money. I didn't make any money, but we bought this plane. We designed these cameras. And we said, let's see if we can make this capability work. So our first revenue was actually looking for cattle on cattle ranches in Montana. They'd pay us like $200, a day to go look for lost cattle with our infrared camera. And we weren't very good at it. We didn't find any cattle. But while we were doing that, we started to figure out how our systems were going to work. And in the process, the local Forest Service representative met us and said, hey, that plane with your infrared camera, that could be really handy for us with wildfires. Have you ever thought of flying fire? And I said, well, if you're paying the bills, I'm going because I'm out of money and I'm broke. So, you tell me where to go and we'll go there. And that's how we literally kind of accidentally fell into wildland firefighting and immediately fell in love with the mission, realized that, this is exactly what we were meant to do from the beginning. We just didn't know it yet. And, we went all in, bought a second plane, the third plane, the fourth plane. We didn't take any money out, no pay, no profit. And we just kept recycling the cash in and growing the business and really bootstrapped it for a few years. And again, grew the fleet up to several planes. And then the camera technology we developed, we started selling that as a product, and that grew really quickly too. And it was really an exciting, fun time. Obviously, at the time, it wasn't very much fun. Looking back, it was a lot of fun. But, and at the course, the same time, I had one baby, and then had a second baby, and had a third baby, and now I'm on to my fourth. But it was a busy time of life, to be sure, but it was really fun, and it was a great learning experience for me and the early team.
There's a couple interesting things that I'd love to tease out a little bit. The first is, so many of us, and I went through this in my first startup, are starting down a path and get to a fork in the road, and it sounds like yours was the Forest Service officer saying, hey, you could do this other thing too. And I know some entrepreneurs say, no, I've got this mission, I've got this vision, we're going for it. And others say, I need the money, let's go for it. Let's try this new thing. How did that fork in the road work for you? How did you come to the decision point to give a try to going a different path than you originally envisioned?
Well, of course, there's the P word in startup world these days, pivot. And of course, pivot in many cases is a euphemism for, well, we failed and this plan didn't work, so let's go make something else does before we raise our next round of VC, right? So I think, but in truth, unfortunately, the word's taken on a negative connotation in the startup world. But whether you want to call it pivot, whether you want to call it morphing, whether you want to call it, adjust on the fly, what I remind people is, the human brain isn't done developing at 17 or 18. Actually, your 20s are some of your most formative years in how your brain develops and your personality develops and your value system and kind of who you are as an adult really starts to take shape. And therefore, what you do in your 20s is really important and formative for kind of how you are going to view things and do things the rest of your life. And For me, I spent most of my 20s fighting an insurgency, which was, a very decentralized, malleable, innovative enemy that frankly didn't have any rules because they were an insurgency. They didn't have a single commander. They didn't have structure. And therefore, if you existed as an opponent to insurgency, which, as you've seen, for decades and centuries on end, is a very rigid, plan-oriented, strategically minded opponent that was unwilling to adjust your methods, your tactics, your procedures, your technology to combat your enemy, you were not going to win. As someone who spent my 20s there on the ground, I credit it a lot for our business success because it made me understand and internalize that mission is what matters. Values and ethics are what matters, making sure your team has the character and ethics that align with your vision, and that your mission is very clear and understood by everyone on the team. I started my businesses knowing that this interesting capability of air-ground integration, of having an aircraft that can support a ground team with sensors, with technology, and save lives and support that team, there was value there. And I knew there was value there. Now, whether that was going to be value in spotting cattle or protecting our border or protecting law enforcement or creating products or providing a service was unclear, to be totally honest. But I knew that there was value there. And I think having the willingness to explore that value proposition and understand it before making a super rigid business plan that was tied to unmalleable conditions, goals, financing, assets, or anything else was really, really important.
So the other pivot point that I want to dig into a second is you realize you've got two things. You've got a product and you've got a service. And some folks would keep those two things in the same business. Some folks would choose one of those two to pursue. You chose to split them into two and pursue them both. And so I want to hear a little about that decision point also.
Yeah, I think there's perfect world conditions. There's what we'd like to do. There's what we want to do. There's what we can do. And there's what we have to do. And I think, this journey of the product service company split from Ascent Vision Technologies, AVT, spinning out of Bridger and eventually becoming a separate company was a combination of all those things. In a perfect world, yes, I probably would love to keep all the businesses together and continue to grow, one big, happy Tim Sheehy family. But obviously, realistic conditions prevail. And one thing we found, which I wouldn't have expected because I was too stupid to know any better, but obviously, money is critical in early business. And money comes in different colors and different shapes and different sizes, and it has different strings attached. And, no dollars created equal. And what I did find as I was growing these businesses as, we had a service model that was, quite frankly, older aircraft that were flying basically by the hour for the government. They were paying us by the hour to go perform a service. And obviously service businesses frequently are a little less sexy. They're generally lower margin than products. They have a slower growth trajectory than products. But, in this case, we had assets and we had long-term government contracts in a highly regulated industry that was growing. And it was a nice business. Banks love that. Banks look at airplanes and contracts. They say, that's awesome, man. I'll give you a loan. And that's great. And then here on the other side of the business, we had some technology, some camera systems, some software that was very innovative. So banks look at that and say, get that away from me fast. Then you go to a venture capital investment. They say, old airplanes, service contracts, government contracts. Ugh, ew. Like, that's so uncool. That's so not doesn't go with my yoga pants and Patagonia vest. No, I don't want to touch that. Ooh, the products, the software, that's really neat.
Right.
Give me that. So as I was at this impasse where my brother and I and my other founders kind of had to look at this and say, all right, Bridger is at a growth point. We need capital to grow now. This is circa 2017, late 16. We've got a certain type of investor here that really wants to back the products, and we have a certain type of investor here that really wants to back the assets. So, part of that was to split those two. That was part of the driving reason for that. So for all those reasons, that split occurred, and it wasn't an easy decision. I think in retrospect, there's no question it was the right decision. Both companies ended up being leaders in their field and growing extremely rapidly to great enterprise values and market capitalizations. But most importantly, each company provided critical services to our nation. Ascent Vision Technologies provided some of the most cutting-edge surveillance and protective equipment to our troops that in 2019, that drone that was shot down the Straits of Hormuz, that was our system that we had helped to invent and create and produce right there in Bozeman. And then, of course, every summer the crews of Bridger take the field and protect the American Western wildfires. So, that's kind of a nutshell story of why we had to split and how we split. And I still maintain it was the right decision.
I find it so fascinating. You talk about how pivots becomes a negative word. The finance realm seems to just dig its heels in on what is a good and what is a bad pathway. And, these days, or at least most recently, everyone wants the unicorn, the product, the tech. And so you'll hear with disdain folks, particularly in Silicon Valley, say, "Oh, well, that's a lifestyle business," or "Oh, that's not a unicorn. There's no exit there." And then you look at some of these service businesses that have long-term contracts, that have real assets, that provide real community and economic value, and think, why is that a bad business? I don't like. People would, love to own a business that returns, 7 figures a year in cash flow, even if it's not growing at 100% and has no billion-dollar exit. Like, it's silly to me that we've found ourselves in this world where like only a unicorn matters, or you can't have value in both types of business structures and both types of profiles of companies.
I couldn't agree more. And it's frankly extremely frustrating to me to see that when, I was just talking to someone the other day about how, traditional American business values, which is sustainability, profitability, good employee retention, good family values in the company, have been supplanted by this obsession with the unicorn, exit. I've never once built any of our business for an exit. Coincidentally, we never did that to begin with. So it's really frustrating to see, especially too, when you look at the critical industries in America, the industries that really matter and support people, the American farmer, the American rancher, they feed our nation, they feed the world. And yet, they barely survive on government subsidies because people will pay. They won't even look at what they're paying for the new pair of yoga pants or trendy, shoes, because that's what they want, or whatever the new iPhone is, whatever the other crap they're buying. But when they buy a plane ticket to get on a plane that's going to fly them at 40,000 feet, and if something goes wrong, they're going to be burned alive in 2 seconds, they buy their plane ticket based on the cheapest ticket they can find. Right. And more than likely, that ticket costs less than their iPhone. But if their iPhone breaks, they're totally fine. If that plane crashes, they're dead. But when do they decide to save money? On a plane ticket. And you know where your T-shirt is made, whether it's Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Thailand, but you don't know where your meat comes from because our food supply chain is focused on bottom dollar. So I completely agree that, the important businesses that you can't eat what's in zeros. You can't eat yoga pants. The industries that really matter, that protect us, that protect our way of life and protect our values are kind of, as you said, treated as like these donkey businesses that nobody likes, and everyone wants the next unicorn business, the next dating app, the next yoga pant. And I think I do think we're seeing some normalization there. I think we're seeing valuations come back to earth, and we're seeing people say, okay, hold on. We've had 15 years of this crazy speculative gold rush. Everyone's digging to unearth the next unicorn. And the reality is what they find is most of those unicorns are like dead dinosaur bones. They're not unicorns. And the reality is the donkey businesses that just are good, steady businesses that return money to investors, that have long-term contracts, that take care of their employees, are once again becoming back in vogue. And I'm proud to say we fall into that category. We're not a unicorn. I think we're a nice horse. Maybe we're not a donkey, but, we get the job done and we're proud of it.
I've heard kind of as you talk some clear military metaphors. And so I do want to get back to that question I mentioned early on, which is how do you think your time in the service has informed your framework for running a business?
Very simple. Again, it comes back to mission. I mean, I keep saying that sounds corny, but I just had an all hands talk with our staff on Monday, and, we did an employee survey, and I'm really passionate about those because I'm a big believer in kind of the theory of wisdom of crowds. And this survey, was kind of neat how the software did it. It had all the words that people used to describe the company, and it conglomerated them into this like mosaic image with the bigger words that were closer to the center represented the words that were most often used throughout the survey by our staff to describe the company. And I was so proud to see and happy to see that, right in the middle, the big, huge, bold words by far was mission. And that's what everyone said is, that's why I'm here. I work at Bridger because of the mission. And I think constantly reminding our staff and our team that, yes, we're a business. Yes, we have to make money. Yes, I want to pay you a lot of money. Yes, I want you to leave my companies if you ever do rich and happy. But ultimately, the mission is what matters. And, we have the privilege at Bridger Aerospace of having a mission that is really important. People depend on us. Oftentimes people don't know anything about what we do until their homes are about to get burned down or they're evacuating with their family. And, when a CL-415 EAF Super Scooper comes in at treetop level and they see the bottom of that plane getting ready to drop, 1,412 gallons, to protect their home and their family, that's the best sight they've ever seen. It's really important for me that mission is pounded into our team. But the beauty is I don't really have to pound it into them. Most people are attracted to it. They see that about our company, and we hear that from our staff.
Something we talk a lot about is that the reality that you can do good in the world and run a great business. And I think there's a multitude of ways and examples of that success story in American corporations. I think one of the ones that I want to talk a little about that you guys are wonderful examples of is your labor force. You're veteran-owned. Veterans make up a huge part of your team. And I want to just talk about the business value add that you have from building a really strong veteran team.
That ethos, that brotherhood, that sisterhood, and that values-based system has been super important for me, just as a human being, as a husband, as a father, and also, as a business founder. And I think we've created that around Bridger. And I think we've been able to tap into, not hiring veterans out of charity. That's bullshit. It's not charity to hire veterans. They're sharp, motivated, capable people who don't need to be hired to meet some quota or to give them a handout. They should be hired because they know what the hell they're doing. And they're smart people who've operated in high pressure environments and who know how to get a job done. So, a lot of people, thank you for hiring veterans. Thank you for making Bridger. I'm like, thank me for anything. Like, I'm lucky to have them. And I'm lucky to have that density of excellence on our team. That's been a huge competitive advantage for us and will continue to be.
That's a great way of challenging the traditional framework. I love it. The other way I think implicit in Bridger's mission is the importance of conserving the natural environment. I mean, you literally are protectors of the forest in many cases. And so I'm curious how you see that part of your business, the role of conservation, environmental protection, sustainability. Like, how do you look at that as part of your mission?
Well, I mean, it's central. I mean, it is the mission. Our mission statement is save lives, protect property, and protect habitat. So, we only get one of these Earths to live on. They're not making any more of them as far as I'm concerned. So we got to take care of it. We got to protect it. And that comes in many forms. I think what we're seeing now in the early, kind of scary to think, almost mid 21st century is, we're starting to see some of the consequences of a lot of our land management policies coming back to bite us. People will bring up climate change related to wildfires all the time. And I'm not evasive about it. Just say, listen, whatever the issue of climate change is, whether humans cause it with their diesel pickup trucks, whether, airliners cause it with their emissions, or, whether it's cows farting on the ranch, or whether it's just natural, cyclical. The climate's been changing since the days of the dinosaurs. So whatever's causing it, I don't really care to talk about because, to be honest, it doesn't matter. Whatever's causing it and whatever we do to stop it isn't going to matter for 50 or 100 years. The reality is my business and my mission is fighting fires today, and those fires are getting worse. A lot of it is the wildland-urban interface. We have a lot of people building homes and living in places that 20 years ago there was nobody there. And 20 years ago, if that 30 acres burned, nobody even knew or cared. It was a bunch of sagebrush and cheatgrass, whatever, didn't make the news. But now when there's 1,000 homes there and 1,000 residents, all of a sudden we got to fight that fire. And then we stopped logging our forests starting in like the 60s and 70s when the environmental preservation movement basically said, let's just put a ring fence around any public lands and stop touching it. Those forests are meant to burn. They're supposed to burn every few years. And by letting that fuel load get to the point where if they burn now, they become infernos. They're far hotter and far more damaging than before. So now when those fires start, we have to fight them so that we can then thin the forest properly, basically go in, responsibly log, not clear cut, but responsibly log these forests, reduce the fuel load so that then when they do burn, they can burn healthily and steadily. And luckily that strategy is finally now being accepted and implemented at the Washington level here in the United States. But the reality is that's going to take it will take a century to go back and clean up a lot of our forests and public lands to get them to a safe status. In the meantime, while that's going on, we have to be ready to fight those fires to protect people. So, the role of Bridger and the aerial firefighter and the conservation and protection of nature and natural resources is obviously critical. At the end of the day, it's a ground firefighter mission. Ground firefighters have to get in and build those fire breaks and evacuate people and protect those forests and those communities. But, we are the cavalry there. We're the ones that are going to get there first. We're going to slow that fire down. We're going to corral it. We're going to hold it long enough, hopefully, for those ground teams to get in and do what they have to do.
What are you most excited about for Bridger for the future?
I'm excited about so much. It's hard to put a word on it. I think, we have a great team. We've had really exciting growth since we founded. We started with a few $100K in revenue in our, 2015 and 16, 17 base. It was a few $100K, $1 million, $3 million, 13, 30, 45, on to 100 this year. So, the money aspect of our growth has been healthy. It's going well. And, I think we're going to continue on that kind of growth trajectory going forward. So that's exciting, not because we all want to get rich, but because that means our plan is validated. It means that the customer, most importantly, is accepting and excited about what we're doing. So that growth is exciting again, but we don't want to grow for the sake of growing. I think companies that become obsessed with a growth mindset and all they care about is grow, diversify, grow, at all costs, they very quickly grow themselves into mediocrity. Although we've grown fast, it's funny, if you sat on my board meetings over the years and listened to me talk locally, growth was never our focus. I knew we would grow, but the focus was quality. The focus was mission. The focus was excellence. And I think by focusing on that, we've grown naturally. So there are some really exciting capabilities we're going to add over the next couple of years. Our software capability is growing at a really exciting rate, and that's going to be a capability that is going to give more, newer, and better fire information to more citizens around the world. So really excited about that. And then, increasing the size of our fleet in the U.S., but most importantly, what I'm probably most personally excited about is taking our capabilities international. We've been entirely U.S. based since founding, but we are in constant discussions with literally 6 out of 7 continents eagerly want us to go and help them with their fire problems. So I think 2023 into 2024, we'll start to see our first international forays, and we're really excited about that.
Last questions I want to get to, which I hope inspire folks that are listening. So they're a little more on the inspirational side and less on the practical side, if you'll indulge.
Sure.
You had this great quote when you won the Montana Land Reliance Conservation Award. It was, "We do not own the land. We are just the current stewards of it. Someone else will walk the ranch in 1,000 years, and they will have no idea who I am. It's important to me that we leave it better than we found it. God isn't making any more land, and we need to take care of that which we have." I really love that quote, and I just was hoping you would talk to us a little bit about it.
Well, thanks for sharing it. It's, we own a lot of farm and ranch land throughout Montana. And that's a passion of my wife and mine and my brothers. Our family are big conservationists. And simply for exactly what I said in the quote is, what I mentioned earlier, God's not making any more land. And what's there, we have to take care of, and we have to preserve for future generations. And preserve doesn't always mean just put a fence around and don't touch it, but we have to be stewards of it, and we have to leave it better than we found it. In some cases, that is protecting it from the hazards that threaten it. In some cases, that's restoring it to a healthier status than it was before. I mean, we saw the consequences of terrible land management many times over. We saw it in the Dust Bowl when literally, half of America was choked out by dust and was starving because of massive federally mandated and directed land management procedures that were wrong-headed. We're not in a too dissimilar place now with some of our forest management that has been misguided for decades on end. So, preserving the land is something that just is really important to us personally as a family. And of course, it ties in with our mission at Bridger very elegantly.
I got the chance to talk to a colleague and friend of yours earlier this week. I'm going to talk to him again next week. But Greg Putnam said something really awesome about you, and I just wanted to let you react to it. He said, you were one of those kinds of guys who sees all these giant challenges and problems that are facing the world that are really big and really complex and really systematic. And in his mind, you're the kind of person who can tackle it. And so I'm curious, the world we live in, I think we are constantly deluged with the big, giant problems and challenges, and oftentimes it looks like we can't solve them. because they're so big and they're so daunting and they're so complex and they're so systemic. How do you combat that in your own perspective? How do you get to a point where you see a potential and a solution to take on these big challenges? How would you suggest we inspire others to do the same?
Not to be too corny about it, but I think there are times where, an individual can make a huge difference. And, sometimes millions or billions of people will just be seeing something happen and saying, man, there's nothing we do about that. And then one person steps up and says, no, we can do something about it. And almost just by that action, by that stance alone, others say, okay, maybe you're right, we can. And, whether it's Winston Churchill against the Nazis, whether it's, Robert Oppenheimer building the atomic bomb, whether it's Rosa Parks on the bus, whether it's Martin Luther King, the list goes on of when a single person has embodied, change on a structural global scale. And in no way am I saying I'm one of those people, but what I'm saying is those individuals can inspire those of us who are dealing with less global challenges. It's not necessarily World War II or racial segregation or atomic energy, but saying, hey, here is a problem that's facing our little family here, or our section of society. And it may seem like we can't solve this, but, that one person solved a challenge a hell of a lot bigger than this. I think we can figure this out. And just having the courage to say, let's try to find a solution. And what I found is normally when one person comes to the table and says, I want to change this dynamic, will you help me? It's amazing what asking for help does. And It's amazing when I've asked for help, I've never once been told no throughout the history of my life for anything, never once been told no, whether it was, having been in a plane crash and I needed help getting, out of the crash, whether it was, wounded colleagues on the battlefield, whether it was business, whether it was money, whether it was advice, every time, it's amazing when you just ask for help. People want to be helpful. And they want to do the right thing. And if you give them the chance to do so, they oftentimes will. Now, you often have to hold them accountable, and it doesn't mean it's going to be a walk in the park. But if one person has the courage to say, I can change this, help me, I think oftentimes others will follow. We're a patriotic, proud to be American company. We're doing an important mission for the country and for the world. We're proud of that mission, but we're also business people. We're focused on doing it in a way that is financially sustainable, that generates return for our investors, and still delivers on the sacred mission we have, which is to save lives, protect property. So I think we're a special business. I think we're the only publicly traded company that has the kind of profile that we do. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, I guess we'll find out here in the next 2 years. But all I can tell you is we have a great team that really does care about the mission and the goodness of the company. And my belief is real fundamentals matter in business. And I think the last 15 years have had a certain amount of suspension of that reality, but fundamentals matter. And I intend to show that Bridger Aerospace, while rooted in our mission, will deliver some really strong business fundamentals that will deliver a lot of value to our employees, to our shareholders, and most importantly, our customers over the next few years. So thanks for having me. This has been really fun.
Awesome.
Well, again, I really appreciate the theme of your podcast and what you guys are trying to do. It's really nice to hear you guys trying to focus on good, positive American stories.
Huge thanks to Tim for the fascinating conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted by me, Connor Gahn. This episode was produced by Will Gatchell and Chandler Bramstead. Executive produced by me with editing from Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to Consensus Creative Director Kate Tucker. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.